Pirates followed their own rules, and the consequences were brutal for those who decided to break them. Discipline had to be kept on board the ship, and marooning was just one of the cruel and unique punishments that a captain had in his arsenal. And in today's video, we're going to be learning more about that. Welcome to Walk the Plank. It seemed that even pirates had their standards. Pirates had their own laws and often drew up articles of agreement. These were a set of codes and rules that all those on board ship had to abide by. Some of the rules included guidelines on how booty should be divided up, how discipline should be kept, or the amount of compensation paid for injuries. One of the most successful pirates in history was Bartholomew Black Bart Roberts. He drafted up some pirate bylaws in 1722. In them, there is the mention of marooning a couple of times. Article 2 states that, quote, "Every man should be called fairly in turn by the list on board of prizes, because over and above their proper share, they are allowed a shift of clothes. But if they defraud the company to the value of even $1 in plate, jewels, or money, they shall be marooned. If any man rob another, he shall have his nose and ears slit, and be put ashore where he shall be sure to encounter hardships." And in Article number 7 it states that, quote, "Deserting the ship or quarters in battle was punished with death or marooning." Pirate principles. John Phillips was easily enticed into piracy and was soon voted captain of the stolen sloop, the Dolphin, in 1723. Phillips' articles were drawn up and had to be sworn upon an axe because the pirates couldn't find a Bible on board the ship. 40 stripes lacking one, known as Moses' Law, to be afflicted for striking a fellow pirate, was one of the punishments listed, and the last of these 9 laws shows that however bent it was, the men did at least have a moral compass, at least where the honor of women were concerned. It states, quote, "If at any time you meet with a prudent woman, that man that offers to meddle with her without her consent shall suffer present death." But it is Article 3 of Captain John Phillips' code that relates to the punishment of marooning. It maintains that, quote, "If any man shall steal anything in the company or game to the value of a piece of 8, he shall be marooned or shot." Clearly, breaking the pirate code could have dire consequences. And marooning was one of the most dreaded punishments of all. A slow, cruel death with not much chance of pardon. The pirate was left dead on a desert island without shelter, food, or fresh water. Only the clothes on his back, about a day's worth of bottled water, a pistol, powder, and shot. His shipmates would escort him to shore on a rowing boat before returning to their ship and sailing away, leaving him there to die. With no food and water and the hot sun burning down, dehydration and starvation would kill him in a matter of days, his skin soon becoming burned and blistered. If the island was small enough or he had been left on a sandbar, as was often the case, at high tide the water would flood in and he could be left standing in neck-deep water. Perhaps he was even unfortunate enough for a shark to catch his scent. Usually his only chance of escape was death by suicide, but to shoot himself with the pistol meant the damnation of his soul. But some pirates were lucky and in rare cases were rescued by another ship and allowed to join their crew. If they were found by a warship or a merchant vessel though, they would be taken to the nearest port and put on trial for piracy. They just keep coming. Some of the survivors of the appalling punishments were Captain William Greenaway and 7 of his crew. It was in October towards the end of 1718 when piracy and mutiny were committed on several vessels and their cargoes. When the mutineers seized his ship, Greenaway refused to join them in their naughty pirating ways, and he and the others were threatened with being taken to a maroon key by Phineas Bunce, John Auger, and their piratical company. Greenaway was taken with the others to a desolate island about 25 leagues distant from Providence. They were cast ashore completely naked and without any provisions on an uninhabited island in the Bahamas named Green Keys, which was covered in dense scrub and surrounded by ragged coral. But then the pirates had a change of heart and decided at the last moment that instead of sailing away and leaving the men, they returned to the island and took the men out to a captured sloop instead. Before they left Greenaway and the men, they destroyed the sails and the rigging by hacking them to pieces so that they were practically useless. It would seem that the men had gone from one perilous situation to another. The sloop was anchored about a mile offshore, and they were still left without any food or water. Greenaway was the only man on board ship who could swim, so after finding a broken axe blade, he slung it around his neck and swam ashore. Once there, he chopped down trees to make rafts. That meant that the men were able to carry cabbage palms, fruit, and berries to the sloop. Within a week, they had repaired the rigging and patched the sail. They were just about to set off when they saw, with horror, that the pirates were returning. Quickly, they got onto their rafts and propelled themselves ashore. Once there, they hid themselves in the dense brush and could only watch hopelessly as the pirates hacked the mast of the sloop apart and then sank the ship in the deep water. 8 more days passed whilst the castaways survived on a diet of fruit, shellfish, and stingrays which they harpooned with self-made spears. The pirates returned several more times and shouted out for them to show themselves, but the men stayed in hiding. Eventually, with a promise of safe conduct, Greenaway and his comrades came out. But it was all a cruel trick, and Greenaway, along with 2 of his companions, was forced to join the pirate company, leaving the other 5 men on the island. For 2 weeks, the Forsaken men survived with what little provisions they had. Then, unbelievably, the pirates returned once again, possibly with some urging from Captain Greenaway. They left a bushel of salt, 2 bottles of gunpowder, a large keg of flour, 2 muskets, a decent axe, some pots and pans, and about a dozen knives at the water's edge. They also left 3 hunting dogs of the type that were used throughout the West Indies for catching wild boar. Now the castaways could have a comfortable existence, catching wild hogs and eating roasted pork. They were able to build a shelter and settle in while they waited for some passing ships to rescue them. But for reasons that only they knew, the pirate ship returned yet again. This time, instead of helping the marooned men, they burned down the hut and ate all the meat. On leaving, they promised never to return and left the men with just a bottle of rum. Not long after, the pirates were captured by the Spanish. After Greenaway told them his story, a rescue boat was sent to Green Key, skippered by a Bahamian man named John Sims. "Comfortable news!" he cried when he arrived on the island. The men were once again hiding for fear that the pirates had returned, but were relieved to find that Sims was their rescuer, and that their ordeal on Green Key Island was finally ended. Be careful what you wish for. Perhaps the most famous of all castaways was Alexander Selkirk. When serving as a privateer, he was marooned on the orders of his captain. Born in Fife, Scotland in 1676, Selkirk was soon drawn into the profession of buccaneering and joined the English privateer William Dampier in the South Pacific. There he served under Captain Thomas Stradling, a sailing master on the vessel Cinque Ports. The company was under Dampier's overall command, but soon parted ways. With Stradling in charge of Cinque Ports, they reached an island in the uninhabited Juan Fernandez archipelago about 420 miles off the coast of Chile. After an argument about the seaworthiness of the ship, Selkirk said he would rather stay on the island than continue on the leaking ship. So Stradling took him at his word and left Selkirk there with a musket, knife, hatchet, cooking pot, bedding, clothing, and a Bible. Selkirk survived for 4 years and 4 months alone on the deserted island. He built 2 huts and survived by eating local vegetation and feral goats. Eventually, in 1709, he was rescued when his old partner William Dampier's company landed. Captain Woodes Rogers of the privateering ship the Duke jokingly referred to Selkirk as the governor of the island. Selkirk quickly returned to his life of privateering, but later became an officer in the British Navy. He died from a tropical illness aged just 45. It's thought that Selkirk's story inspired the character Robin Crusoe in Daniel Defoe's seminal novel. As for the Stradling, the Cinque Ports did sink later. Selkirk was right about that, near to the coast of Colombia, and the crew was captured by the Spanish. They were imprisoned in Lima, Peru. The good and the bad. During the golden age of piracy, Charles Vane operated in the Bahamas. He was known for his cruelty. He would often beat, torture, and kill sailors from captured vessels. But it was a natural occurrence that marooned Vane rather than another man. After being voted out of captaincy in favour of Calico Jack Rackham, Vane and his first mate Robert Deal were cast off to sea on a sloop. Vane and Deal sailed to the Bay Islands off the coast of Honduras, capturing other vessels on the way, but were separated when a hurricane hit. Vane was wrecked off a desolate island where the ship was staved to pieces and most of her men drowned. Vane lived there for some weeks and survived chiefly by fishermen who frequented the island. Vane was caught there, arrested, and taken to prison in Jamaica. In 1721, he was tried and convicted of piracy, he was hanged, and his corpse was hung in chains. Unlike Vane, the Irish pirate Edward England was known for his kind, compassionate nature. He had reached the Indian Ocean and captured a Dutch gunship which he named Fancy. After resentment from his quartermaster, a vote was organised and England, along with 3 others, was marooned on the island of Mauritius without any provisions. After scavenging for about 4 months, Captain England and his companions made a little boat, left there and went over to Madagascar, to the pirate haven of St. Augustine's Bay. England lived there on the charity of other pirates. He later died just age 36 of a tropical disease. He is known as one of the more humane pirates of the Golden Age, who was, quote, generally overruled and obliged to be a partner in the other pirates' vile actions. Thank you for watching this episode of Walk the Plank, and I'll see you next week for another one. Have a great week. Cheers!